Hey, hey everyone, the maiden voyage of Simple Coast, Bill Ryan. Uh, this is going to be a show where we talk all sorts of issues, but it's going to focus on the intersection of law and politics. Um, there's a just a voluminous amount of things that you can talk about from this type of angle, and that's the goal here is to try to inform viewers about some of the legal maneuvering taking place in our society today and why it's happening the way it is. All right. So with that, considering it's a maiden voyage, you might be asking, "Hey, who's this guy?" Well, as I said, my name is Bill Ryan. I'm a veteran. I went into the Navy in 2004. This was a couple few years after I'd gone to National Auto Diesel College. I was working on cars in Southeast Missouri, able to make ends meet. I was at an independent shop, and I was doing my own kind of personal thinking about the future, and I didn't see a major future for independent shops, and that did bear out. I think that after I joined the Navy in 2004, 10 to 15 years after that, I think independent automotive shops were, cut in half across the country. Part of that is due to technology within the auto companies trying to keep their cars in their dealership shops, and then just a kind of also the just a greater sophistication in cars. So it was almost from where I was at in the kind of middle of the Midwest in 2004. Now, mind you, when I tell my life story, I also kind of like to um, juxtapose it against bigger policies that are at play. So some of the bigger policies that were at play then was NAFTA. NAFTA was passed in the 90s. NAFTA decimated the South and Southeast and Midwest manufacturing. And then right around the time that I would have been going in would have been a lot of debates and things around the entrance of China into the World Trade Organization, another blow to the American worker. So I was I was poor in the Midwest. I did not see myself going to college at the time because I had substance abuse issues. I think technically I've had substance abuse issues most of my life as far as alcohol goes. So part of my rationale for joining was to, confront that, to deal with, to get money for education, and to see the world. And I did those things, but I got an education along the way. So I joined from St. Louis, and then we went to Chicago in '04. From there, you did boot camp. There was a couple instances in boot camp I want to talk about real quick on a personal perspective. There was one instance where one of the instructors had us sit down and watch a decapitation video. And it was of, I think the last name of the guy was Bergman or Berg. He was a contractor in Iraq at the time. And we were Navy recruits who were most of us going to go to ships. Most of us were never going to, see land or any type of combat war zone like that. So I just found it odd. Now, in hindsight, what that was is I don't know if it was programmatic or if it was just, this instructor's personal decision. Regardless, uh, it was a way to kind of dehumanize the uh, the enemy, right? Because that's from the American perspective when you're in the military, the other is the enemy that you're supposed to, go fight. Very little talked about why, right? It was just at that time it was still just, oh, 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. Um, so I almost immediately when I went into boot camp, I was kind of like, this is, I don't know if this is great. And then the first night, I'm laying in bed, and Toby Keith comes on the loudspeakers as the red lights had just come on to, for everyone to go to sleep, and I'm just like, oh my God, I've been had. So, but at the same time, I didn't quite understand what I'd walked into or what I was doing. So I'm just like, all right, I'm go along, get along, let's see what happens. So next couple of years, I was recruited out of boot camp to go to Ceremonial Guard in DC. There, I did a lot of standard and full honors funerals, and some other kind of specific funerals, like on the tomb, like special or not funerals, special ceremonies, like at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and like when you do wreath layings or Memorial Day type of ceremonies. So I, I think that's kind of probably a highlight of my time there. Now, we never guarded the tomb because that's reserved for the Army, but we would do kind of, I forget exactly what they're called, like full honors cordons or joint service ceremonies and those kind of things. After uh, DC, I went to an F-18 squadron. The F-18 squadron was attached to the Eisenhower. And from 2006 to late 2006 to mid 2007, I was a supply and logistics guy for a squadron. And I've got about a year of sea time under my belt. Um, I think part of my experiences in the squadron kind of I do think come down to the crews and kind of the confusion of my service, right? So I did 2 years in a ceremonial guard, and then I'm kind of thrust into this ship. This all happens very quickly. I'm like, by the end of 2000 and what? Yeah, 2006. I'm a not a well-traveled person, not a well-read person, not a cultured person, but I had gone to Rome and Naples through the Navy. We parked at Naples and then took a pool. Um, then came the more kind of active support part of the cruise, where our crews supported actions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Horn of Africa, right? So these are, at the time, no one really talked about why we were doing this. And also at the time, public learning against the wars. So I think from a personal view, I had to ask, why are we doing this? And why do we not talk about the political and social and economic and just civilizational ramifications of what we're doing here? You know, we're in the middle of the ocean sending planes to all these places in support of troops, um, all of them also from halfway around the world. And I don't know if you asked any of them about like the political ramifications or social ramifications of these things, if they would be able to answer that. So that was just from a personal perspective, I think just another example of me kind of living in a little bit of disbelief. See, before I joined the Navy, I thought, oh, the U.S. helped win World War II. Okay, and then we had some blunders with Korea wasn't even really in my memory that much. Vietnam was just viewed as, oh, okay, it's a little bit. It was a blunder. But now we don't talk about it like 3 to 5 million dead on the Vietnamese side as anything but a genocide, which it is, which it was, which it always has been. And then because of the culture that I was a part of, right? I mean, a lot of veterans, this is true after World War II. This is probably true after Korea and Vietnam. A lot of guys come home and they either, you know, uh, isolate. A lot of times after World War II, it was a VFW. Nothing like that. Nothing of the sort really emerged during or after any of the War on Terror. One thing that did emerge during the War on Terror was a massive veteran suicide rate. Massive veteran suicide rate. And part of that is it goes back to kind of what I'm trying to hit at with my story, which is there's a real gap between the perceptions people have in the United States about what they think they're going to sign up and, do for the military or in the military versus what is actually done and how you're used. And I think that, and listen, hey, had I joined, I was a signature away. I'd given my stuff to an Army recruiter before I joined the Navy. I got talked into I befriended a pretty cool Navy recruiter at the time. Got talked into joining the Navy instead of the Army. I joined the infantry, who knows? I don't know where wound up. That for a lot of the people who do that, it takes a massive psychological and physical toll t- on all of them, honestly, on anyone who engages in it. And in this culture, in American culture, it's like, oh no, war is like supposed, you know, it's it's almost like a pathway to manhood. Even like we talked about this 100 years ago in Black Recon. Problem with this almost, d- this desire to kill or something as to meaning to this pathway to manhood or something like that. It's really it's really psychotic, but it's absolutely something that is played to in this culture even today. I mean, the Pentagon and various, uh, oligarchic forces that always are thinking about how to, overpower and take resources from groups all over the world are always thinking about media strategies on how to coax poor people to do that, right? Again, anything powerful people want, they get generally because we just saw today. I mean, I'm doing this at the same day that TikTok was banned and then reinstated or something, So, and this is after 3 decades of school shootings, um, massive healthcare uh, debacle. I mean, I don't even know what you call modern American healthcare. Uh, Decades of imperial war. Again, if you look at the Pentagon on the East Coast, that is 2 decades of what should be considered failure, and at this point, fraud because they can't pass an audit, right? And then if you look at on the West Coast with Silicon Valley, they've also gotten trillions over the last couple decades, and we got an iPhone and some computers, and that in and of itself is a technological revolution, has been a technological revolution, um, one that should not be underestimated, and one I don't think we have full, the repercussions. So let me get back to the cruise in 2007. So another significant part of that cruise, other than just, being out on the water and just, basically doing my job, it was odd for me being on a ship because it was, connected to the web and everything. So I'm literally like keeping track of doing my job and then applying for university at the same time, right? And I was just like, what are we doing? What are we doing? I'm on this boat, and part of the reason I'm here is honestly just I'm a bit of an adventurer. Like I said, I was parochial to the Midwest. I grew up poor. I didn't really care about education as a young person. Still very skeptical of it, quite honestly, even having gotten so much of it. Um, and Now, I come from that setting to stepping off of a ship to Dubai. And I think the Dubai thing was, or like just like seeing Dubai is interesting because of the wealth, right? I grew up in a single wide trailer, lived most of my life relatively poor. Up until I got like a modest inheritance at 30, I was paycheck to paycheck all my life for the most part up until 30 years old. And I'm assuming that that's a very, you know, uh, empathized or relatable uh, position in modern America. So I go from that existence to, uh, in a few short years, going through all these, kind of Navy pathways, organizational pathways, to now I'm standing in Dubai. We pulled into Dubai multiple times during this cruise. And the first thing you notice is the massive wealth. It's in your face. It's in the desert, and they have a ski slope during a climate crisis. If just to illustrate the psychosis that I'm talking about here. Now, the other thing that I noticed that I don't know if a lot of people noticed or cared about is like at the time, this was '07, I think, there's a lot of um, construction. It was during the building of that tallest tower, I forget the name of it. And you know who's doing the construction, right? They're all dressed in blue fatigues and Pakistanis and Indians, a sea of them. The first thing I'm thinking is I'm like, well, there's no way that all of them really necessarily like want to be there and have control. And subsequent investigations and subsequent reporting has honestly kind of, I think, buttressed my belief that they were indentured servants, if not slaves. And we call that international labor moves. Like, it's like modern economists have this Orwellian doublespeak that so long as a thing makes money, so long as a process makes money, so long as a process creates value, material value, and they don't say this, but based on the values of uh, a wealthy individual or corporation. So it's really deeply subjective as to what some material values are. Regardless, it appeared to me that this was, should be as a massive, massive blow against national labor standards. I just don't think there are. And to see it like in your face and to see this ocean of people, and usually when I see them, they become an offer, so they all look tired and everything. And it was just something that kind of left an imprint on me. And I think that a mix of the travel, a mix of confusion about trying to figure out a motive as to what was happening there, just with the war on terror in general. I okay. I I stepped out of the Navy in 2008. I would say again, somewhat dejected and somewhat just in a state of disbelief. I think that if there's one kind of running theme in my life, it's I've been kind of understanding why things are the way they are, but I just keep going as we all do, well, I guess. So I stepped out of the military in 2008, and you know what was happening then? The mortgage crisis. So I was starting university at SIU Carbondale when large swaths of the country, were being hit by massive uh, foreclosures and just a housing market collapse brought to you by a supposed market that was not really ever supposed to collapse. Now, I want to take a second here too to say that as I was getting out, or around 08, 09, there was a moment where every the U.S. Congress had a chance to, update the GI Bill. The Montgomery GI Bill, I was looking into things. I was like, man, this sucks. Like it was terrible by the time I was coming out in '08. The post 9/11 GI Bill is much better. The Montgomery GI Bill, I was lucky because I had the Montgomery GI Bill and then Illinois had the Illinois Veterans Grant. That's where I joined out of. So I was able to, kind of maximize uh, the educational benefits that I was able to get from my service. Um, but there was one senator, John McCain, who tried feverishly to kill the post 9/11 GI Bill. So, that's it. Just for me, if if someone ever comes out and is pretending to be too pro-military or talks bolsterous or wants to present themselves as the face of the military or something, you just scratch below the surface with most of these people. There's too much overlap between the Lockheed Martins and the Raytheons and the Boeings of the world, and most of these higher level people, to for them to really believe what they say. There is proof of money in modern, as we've seen. I mean, uh, in the last year, we've seen massive amounts of money sent overseas, and this year was record set for homelessness, 750,000 on the streets, and I think that's an undercount because, as we know, the modern United States is a genocidal state. Uh, it it just seems to not be able to tell the truth, and the lies that it tells tends to be in favor of mass death. So I step out of the Navy in '08. Financial crisis going on. I'm on a GI Bill at SIU Carbondale. For a brief second, I was thinking about, because healthcare in the Midwest is huge. And honestly, because of deindustrialization and because of the big box stores and fast food and things being the kind of new bedrock of the kind of Midwestern economy, um, healthcare is a really kind of convenient path to go to make etch out a decent living. So I was just kind of thinking about doing like a physician assistant path or something like that. But when I looked into, honestly, the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't deal with people in that kind of way. And I honestly, I just couldn't deal with the bodily fluids of others in a routine basis like that. So I had to figure something else out. Also, another thing is the healthcare system at that point in time was insane. And the transition out of the Navy to the civilian life, you can get Cobra, which is at that time was like $300 a month, where you pay $300 to keep your military insurance until you get somewhere else. Or At that time, you just go uninsured if you have any pre-existing conditions. And you know what a pre-existing condition was at that time? Alcohol rehab, which I did in the Navy. So I did an alcohol rehab in the Navy. I was actually sober for quite some time. I get out and I'm told I cannot get health care because of that. Right. And this was happening with diabetics, frivolous pre-existing conditions. Did you get a scratch on your knee 15 years ago? I'm sorry, sir. We cannot cover your cancer treatment. And this was 2008. And contrary to public opinion, public opinion is very split on this thing. I mean, Obamacare, it did, it was a handout to the health insurers. I mean, if you look at it, it strengthens some things, but I mean, quite honestly, you don't wind up with a CEO getting gunned down in the street if things are going okay. They're not. They're not. And it's so it's infuriating even having to like verbalize these things. CEOs of American companies cook into their balance sheets mass death. And that is not a trivial issue. Not a trivial issue at all. Especially in this moment where you have generations that have real deep disconnects on what they have access to. Because I've watched young people die most of my life because they don't have access, or a lot of young people die for they don't have access to proper mental health treatment. Some of the jobs that you think should, they just don't. Or let's say that you're in the military or you're in the medical high stakes uh, medical field or some other high stakes field where you actually a therapist or counselor routinely, but you don't because it's against because you could get professionally sanctioned, if not officially. You get sanctioned unofficially. So yeah, so healthcare at that point in my life was in 2008 was for, forefront kind of, and technically healthcare to one degree or another has always been a part of my life. My mother's had multiple back surgeries, right? My father had cancer. All of these things, terminal cancer, all of these things like what comes along with it is tremendous amount of bills, tremendous amount of struggles dealing with insurers and hospitals and third parties of all sorts. Like the only people in love with the complexity of the healthcare system are thieves and fraudsters. That's it. That's it. Let me get back. So I'm out of the Navy. I went through this little personal process about, what do I do? What do I do? Well, after kind of thinking my, what I could do within a certain realm of feasibility in the region um, for employment, and then I was just thinking kind of like the whole healthcare thing. I was like, now, would it be better for me to do healthcare as a practitioner or just because that's one issue I care about. I care about a lot of issues. Again, I stepped out of the Navy very confused, very, very dejected, and very curious, right? Because when I got out in '08, the war has never stopped. But it's like you go from a command where the war is life. You're propagandized in training. You're propagandized and through relationships, friendships, right? So, and then you come to the so-called civilian world, and it's nothing. Doesn't register. doesn't even register, especially with the financial crisis unfolding. So I decided at that point to essentially study classics and political science. And my personal belief is I think it was a great decision. I enjoyed studying. I still enjoy reading classic plays and philosophical texts and those type of things. Yeah, I was introduced to a lot of really great scholarship at that time, 100%. And also what I kind of got into at SIU was democratic politics. I worked on a lot of campaigns, did door knocking, worked out in the field, have been a field organizer, field director. Actually, in 2012, I was a field director for Gary Forby's campaign, and I mean, at that time, it would have been 2012. So several years prior to that, Gary Forby had had an office next to Obama. And if you ever meet or see Gary Forby and then meet or see Obama, it's they're polar opposites. I think that if you ever, they're both politicians though, so if you ever interact with either one of them on an individual level, um, I, I think that they're both probably pretty engaging in their own way. Um, but I also during that process of just being out in the field, one thing a state rep in Southern Illinois really said, and I'm sure that a million state reps have said it, but it's true. If you really want to know a district, if you really want to know where you live, go volunteer on a campaign. Go knock on doors. Go talk to people. It is the best way to open your eyes up to kind of where you're at and what you're doing and who you're around and what the actual makeup is of the kind of district in which you live, the area in which you live. I've met a lot of people who had lived in places for, X number of years, and then they finally volunteer on a campaign or run for office, and they're like, I really had no idea that all of these things existed where I'm at, right? So they're even though the Democratic Party at the state level and the federal level, and well, the Republican Party too, the parties are owned by the parties are a placeholder. They're just kind of an icon, and under that icon is a tremendous amount of relationships between legislators, lobbyists, and wealthy interests, and uh, they have uh, a really convoluted way, an indirect way of kind of trying to achieve and get what they want. So I I step out of the Navy in '08, in university, '09 and 10. I really got into the political stuff, which is very easy to do at a university because there's tons of organizations, there's tons of people. And I generally I made a lot of great relationships. I think made a lot of great friends and had a lot of great times. One time, a really fun time was when I ran for student government president in 2010, and I ran against got him Prisciliano Fabian. He was a president, and I ran against Marcus King, who wound up winning. Really charismatic and great person. I can still consider him a very good friend. Um, but even there, you get to see just how even in a small state school in a student election, the knives can come out, and I like it when the knives come out. I mean, I don't really care. I kind of I metaphorically, of course. I'm not really an advocate for mass or individual violence of any sort. I think there's a violent world already without anybody advocating for it. So, but politically speaking, it seems that almost any political campaign that you can get into is one where you can just get into the pit and tango. Another thing that I did while at university was volunteering for AmeriCorps. And part of that was to tutor uh, kids at school part time. And another part of that was to do, service oriented volunteering, which generally I would do, donation drives. I did a donation drive for MLK Day in, I think, 2010. I think it was 2010. That got a lot of stuff, a lot of like donations taken, brought to us that we then subsequently took to uh, a Goodwill or local uh, donation center. And the other thing I did was Habitat for Humanity. I helped build, help several. I helped on a couple different boards, and then help build a couple few different homes, at least in part. I really thought that the AmeriCorps was, a a good experience. Again, in anything I've ever done, I've always met a lot of good people. I've always formed decent relationships. Um, and I always try to take something out of what I get, and I always try to give back too. I always try to enjoy, like I try to take joy in what I do, and I try anyway to ensure that what I do uh, it pushes some type of positive benefit, even though sometimes it's hard to know whether that's happening. So another thing, while I was at university in 2011, Bin Laden was killed, and I just kind of want to highlight this in reference to the Luigi Mangione assassination of the healthcare CEO, because there was a lot of pent up, you know, collective almost rage that expressed itself. And anybody who, especially under 40, anybody under 40 who's interacted with the healthcare system, it is a system with no safeguards and it's predatory. That is what it does. So I was not surprised to hear that outcry when that happened. Again, I don't sanction these type of things, but at the same time, I don't condone them. But it's like at the same time, I don't, I'm not gonna sit here and just, explode, just be like, oh well, there's no explanation at all because this of America is jacked. One and two, uh, just go look at videos of the Bin Laden El Baghdadi deaths and look how celebratory people were. Well, I mean, when Kissinger died, there were a lot of celebrations. When Lizzie died, when they put Lizzie in a box, Queen Elizabeth, I mean, I think everyone saw the Irish kind of do their do their thing. So I don't necessarily think death should be celebrated, but at the same time, I just kind of want to hit and just I remember watching these things, and because of my time in service, I was I don't I was not really I don't really like necessarily relishing when people die like that. But at the same time, that it is a thing that happened. So um, I graduated in 2011. 2012, I entered into law school and withdrew about 6 months after that to take care of my terminally ill father. He had esophageal cancer. He was given a basically I'd finished I'd finished finals, and then within a week, I was in a office with my father and his doctor, and his doctors basically said, "You got till April." So to me, I wasn't gonna sit an hour away from my dad um, dying, so I couldn't do it. So I moved in with him, and luckily he had enough funds where he could cover my bills, and I know not everybody has that, and that's a problem. And that is something that this country could do. This country could set up a program where you sign up and say you show proof that you have someone in, basically terminally ill or requires massive amounts of care and time, and they should pay you. It really could be that simple. So I spent most of my 2013 making medical appointments with my father uh, until he passed away a day before my 30th birthday. So that was a big thing. And then came another eye-opening experience for me. As with any familial death, sometimes there are inheritances, right? So I received a modest inheritance, but prior to receiving this, I was check to check at 30. Started working when I was 15. Um, had been gainfully employed until I was 30, and then and not just that, under anxiety, under tremendous anxiety, part of the hustle culture, right? And I I kind of got the inheritance, and I'm like, oh wow, I can breathe. Oh wow, I don't have to. Oh God, there, like, oh, I don't have to make the sacrifice now. Sacrifice this thing to move forward with this thing, or forego doing one thing to one maybe necessary thing that should be done. Let's say get health care or um, uh, buy some type of basic necessity. But instead of that, you have to, use the money for, some other pressing issue. So most of my up until 30, that's what it was. Then, you know, absolute tragedy hit, and then I'm either blessed or cursed to be like to get reprieve and to be able to breathe. And not only that, once you do it long enough, once you're like, for me, once I was like, oh wow, none of this hustle culture shit, none of this is worth it. They got this country out there trying to get people to become billionaires when really you want an extra 500 to $1,000 a month. Most people, you know. Or you want dependable, reliable healthcare that's not going to bankrupt you. Or maybe you'd want to like be able to get a job and not have to search for 6 months and put out 500 resumes. It's absurd right now. I mean, it's not just absurd. And just real quick, any complaint that I might make here, just know, like minorities in this country, black people or indigenous people, they they've experienced this is decades old. This is just me finally kind of like going through these personal moments like, oh, okay, wow, yeah. This is really, really a psychotic place. So after um after my father passed, I went to Eastern Illinois to get a master's degree in computer technology and networking. And um, I I think there was just, for me, it was just kind of like a just relax time for me just to sit back and just relax for a minute. Because honestly, it was a kind of a living with my father was kind of like a term, like a very um, emotional event for me. Very emotional event. So I started at Northern Illinois University as a law student in uh, 2015. And I really enjoyed being a law student. I did. I enjoyed it for on a lot of levels. One, because any like almost like, as my life has progressed, I'm always looking on my personal experience and always doing I've always got an internal dialogue going about um, what am I learning now, and how is this knowledge now uh, changing the way I view the past. For instance, just real quick, when I was in undergrad, I took some political theory classes, and we would talk about, they're talking about Hayek. The only thing read in political theory that I read about Marx was the Communist Manifesto, arguably not the most important writing of Marx or the best writing of Marx. Locke, there's a traditional like Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, all these people, and the more I read, the more I read, the more I read, the more I was just like, what? None of this makes sense. None of these theories make sense with what I just witnessed in the military. And especially when you juxtapose what I saw in the military versus when I grew up. So I grew up with a mindset of scarcity. I get in the military, and this thing has an unaccountable budget. So you know what that means? They're throwing fucking money everywhere. They got money everywhere. So I go from scrimping to get money out of a soda machine to, if you want it, to a certain degree, depending on what it is, you know, whether it's for yourself or your command, you can figure out a way, or for your command, really, you can figure out a way to get it. And financially for me, I was better off financially in the military than I was before I went in. And they don't pay a lot in the military at all. So it's just it's amazing the various cognitive dissonances that are at play at any given time with this civilization. So only real comments I want to make about the the law or law school or whatever is, I'll just say that from my experience, what I see is that the law, one, there is not the law. There's all sorts of legal doctrines and regimes and all sorts of ways to apply them or not apply them. But there's one thing uh, that law schools try to do, and I don't know if that this is still true of legal education today. But I always consider like the first year law schools or first year law 1L curriculum to be like an indoctrination into liberalism or some form of liberalism. So it's basically civil procedure, constitutional law, contracts, property law, criminal law. And again, if you look at each of these disciplines um, as an academic uh, endeavor, there's all sorts of intricacies that you can get into with them, and that may be problematic because with civil procedure, uh, you make a lot of money with civil procedure because it is so complex and there are so many different variations depending on where you're at and what you're doing and all these things. Now, constitutional law, well, I think should be very clear at this point is it's been gamed out. It's been gamed out. Uh, it, it- the First Amendment is with precedent that we have from the 60s. I think, we saw with the Palestinian protests around the country last year that wealthy people know how to manipulate the rules and norms governing organizations and institutions to clamp down on almost any speech that they find um, uh, odious, that they just that or contrary to their desires, and that's a problem. Contracts. I mean, How do you have three billionaires, or yeah, how do you have, let's say, 10 billionaires who have more wealth than the top or bottom 50% of the country? It suggests there's freedom of contract. How how do you really have like such dilapidated labor um uh, uh, norms and laws and all these things? Uh, like the whole labor regime in America, when you look at the way elites have undermined it, when you look at um, the real serious lack of protections, I would argue, that exist with it, I don't I don't think that there really is freedom of contract or freedom to contract in a lot of different scenarios that we just assume because I guess because they happen to some people. Maybe some people can freely contract in certain arenas where others can't. In my opinion, if you don't have a solid economic foundation personally in this country, you're never really free to contract. Uh, and then property law. Okay, very common thing is to say, oh, property law, a bundle of sticks, one thing. It's just a bundle of different interests, right? The right to exclude these kind of things. Um, and the bundle of sticks has set the world on fire. That's it. A individual, I think modern property law tilts towards an individualistic, less collective view of property rights, generally down on the individualistic interpretive level. And I think that if you look at the world today, um, if there's if there's one thing that if we're going to continue to have law schools, if there's one thing that's got to change, you have to start figuring out a different way around property law, or a different way to think about property law. I would say all these regimes, really. The constitutional law has been gamed out by all wealth. All wealth has gamed out the Constitution. They can get what they want. Torts. You're supposed to, right? You're supposed to be able to. The theory is that torts are supposed to curb or change corporate behavior to prevent future mistakes or deaths or fatalities. What it's turned into is a big, three-card Monte game or shell game of just paying, corporations paying off people they've injured. That's it. And it gets a lot of attorneys rich, but I don't know that it affects corporate behavior. And just to kind of hit on some stuff I talked about earlier, it's not going to, like, if torts aren't affecting corporate behavior, and if corporates have bought the legislatures, federal and states, then what's controlling corporate behavior? Because they're clearly out of control. So, and then with criminal law, I mean, honestly, at this point, I mean, the UN probably has grounds to come in. And again, assuming the US wasn't this like, the power structure of the US wasn't psychotic and didn't think that it, needed or should adhere to any type of international norm. Um, the prison industrial complex in the US is insane. And just real quick, I want to just to kind of lay out for a viewer, I went to a state school, like it's considered a lower tier law school, like a tier four school. It's like one, two, three, four. The Harvards and Yales are one, and then the U of I's. I think U of I might even be, closer to the top there. But and then you just, kind of often the wealthier the schools, the uh, higher the ranks and that kind of thing. And they have all sorts of other metrics that they use. Um, but that system creates a couple pipelines. You've got a pipeline of low tier law school attorneys that go to public service. And if you're like me, I've always been public service oriented. I've always kind of, tried to be as community oriented as I can be. And that's with a shifting definition of community. I understand communities can be all sorts of things. So uh, that's sorry. So with these pipelines, it's like you have the lower tier schools have pipelines that run straight from law school to Social Security disability. So I did that. Public defense, I did that. Right? You could take either one of those into, well, I did Social Security disability and did public defense as a attorney for the state or a public defender's office, which it's odd. It's like it's public defense is a state, the state is a state, the judge is a state, and it's weird. Now, on the flip side, with the upper tiers, often what they're vying for is, big law, right? But there's some major problems with this whole dynamic. One, even the law school I was at, most of the students there are upper middle class students, right? Like most of these people have not like gone to bed hungry too much in their lives. And the top tier people, these people don't think poor people are people. So that's like it's hard to really underestimate how many maladies and pathologies in modern America come from the collective psychology of wealthy Americans and the fact, and maybe, any group really, but once you start dehumanizing other groups and, pushing what you're doing on, or you pushing your beliefs that they're not human beings and that, they're commodities or they're things to be exploited. Terrible things happen. Terrible things happen. So, these are very. I would argue that these things you could probably tease these things out through research, and they might have already been. Everything's research at this point. Everything's research, yet the whole civilization feels like it's corrupt, um, and and that we don't know anything. So I don't really know what the hell's going on. So another thing that I experienced at law school was the power of the Federalist Society. That anytime I've seen a faculty or staff have to deal with the Federalist Society, they were always respectful, way more respectful than I would have been. And uh, uh, Often they would take a lot of their arguments in faith. And hey, maybe that's good considering that right now Trump is about to take power, and there's a strong possibility that the Project 2025, there's at least going to be these people who authored that will be lobbying for it vigorously. You have to assume that. My personal belief is that if any big thing, let's say the right passes total abortion ban in the quick I think they pay a price for that. I think they pay a major price for that in the midterm. So I think that we're about to, and maybe they don't. Maybe they do it, and things go on, and maybe there's no price. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see if kind of how the politics of this all play out. Um, Now, after I went to uh, I graduated in 17, went out to Seattle. I was actually in Puyallup for a little bit. I mean, actually, for about a month, I'm pretty sure I'm the only person who's ever paid rent at a what do you call it? At a squat shack. I'm pretty sure so it was like a duplex, and I'm pretty sure on one side of the duplex there were squatters, and on the other side of the duplex, uh, I had paid rent. But within a month, I'd had one of my windows shot out, so I was like, nah, fuck this. So I went to a different apartment in Puyallup. So while there, I took the bar, passed the bar. It was on a third try. After the second attempt, I was after I'd taken it, and there's this lag between when you take it and when you get it, or when you get the results. That was when I hopped on the Sarah Smith campaign, and Sarah Smith was running against Adam Smith, who is a war criminal. And at the time, I had thought that, oh my God, the Democratic Party is so corrupt. They are now running wife against husband. Luckily, when I went to see everybody, that was not the case. Um, Sarah was a very smart and courageous candidate, and she ran a campaign that I think, one, had we had the money, she would have won. Two, um, she had a great one. Adam's still there. She had a great opponent. I mean, he's a terrible person. Um, he's got he's drenched in blood. If there's it, like, okay, the last year, the worst people, yeah, Matt Biden, obviously, Matt Miller, obviously, that Patel guy, obviously, um, but Adam Smith, obviously. I mean, this is a guy who was tied up in decisions to send arms to, like, blow up school buses of kids well before Israelis were blowing up hospitals of kids. So, or schools of kids, or pick your public place of civilians, it seems like. So, um, I think that, let me see. I think that that race for me was, uh, I really enjoyed it. One, on a lot of these Democratic Party type of campaigns, there's a lot of tight control on messaging, and we had some control on messaging. But it was a campaign where everybody, I think, had a lot of input to what everyone kind of, was what Sarah was pushing, and there was a lot of debate and a lot of uh, dissent, and a lot of teamwork and cooperation, and a lot of fun. It was a good time, and I wish she would have won. And I can wish only terrible things on Adam Smith. So after after my time out there, I came back to the Midwest. I helped out on a state rep race in Southeast Missouri for a guy Layton. He, wound up not winning because it's a traditionally 60-40, 70-30 right to left, or Republican to Democrat split. So it was a uphill climb. Um, and while I was doing that, I was also working for Social Security Disability. Um, I want to talk about that real quick because it does a really good. So I did about 100 or so hearings, and I never met anyone who had a spare dollar. I had clients commit suicide, and that is, uh, it's infuriating. It's infuriating for me. It was infuriating to sit through these hearings and have administrative law judges, and they're just doing their job, right? Whatever. But they're working through these criteria with these people who have nothing, right? They've been really, what they've been doing is, a lot of these people out surfing for months on end, rootless for months on end, right? So uh, lots of addiction problems, lots of drug and alcohol problems, because we're talking about a client base often that is, by the time that they're seeing an attorney, they've been in the process for years and they've been not just poor, they've been dead ass broke for a long time. And that is, it's a broken system. It's a broken system. My belief is like the whole country is just a series of broken systems that we don't really necessarily talk about like that. But that is what it is. So COVID stopped that. It's actually kind of funny. Like one of the first weeks that the media really was pushing, the whole lockdown or just like masking and that kind of thing. I was in a for whatever reason, I just remember that the media around it was amped up. I was doing a hearing. I just start coughing uncontrollably, and I didn't have COVID, but I did have a terrible cough. But it made everybody uncomfortable. It made the judge uncomfortable. At one point, I thought they were going to call the hearing, but they didn't. But right after that, they shut the offices down, and then shortly after that, I was out of that firm, and then uh, I think I was unemployed for a little bit, and then went to become a public defender. And that was, uh, I, know, anybody who has studied any kind of law is relatively certain that the criminal system is uh, just deeply problematic on so many levels. And if there's one thing, I mean, if there's one thing that if there's one thing I have to, that I could just add to it would be um, poverty in America is criminalized. It's really that simple. Rich people in this country steal 1,000 different ways from working and poor people. Um, and often it is very much not legal. But again, this is a country where the laws are not applied to the rich and the poor. It's not even close. I mean, the idea that Trump was trying to present himself as this like that the system was trying to present that they were treating him like a normal person. This guy had a bathroom full of like secret documents. And I'm not a big fan of like the overclassification and all these things, but um, anybody else who had a bathroom full of secret documents, they'd be in jail till the trial. Period. No questions asked. And I would say with some of his other charges, I'd say if he was anybody other than who he is, he would probably, had experienced um, pre-trial detention. I mean, you have a lot of people in the U.S. sitting in jail for years with no trial, and often with very shaky evidence, or sometimes even no evidence. I shouldn't say no. I should just say very shaky, bordering on no. So for me, I think for me, another issue that with the criminal system has drugs, right? So for decades, we locked up, prosecuted and locked up tens and hundreds of thousands of poor brown and black people over weed. Now a bunch of rich white people own dispensaries, making their gold mines. And you can look, you don't believe me? Go look at who's getting these permits in state after state after state. Again, like it's an issue. So I did several trials during that time as a public defender. I also during that time I met a lot of great people. There are a lot of really good attorneys across where I was practicing at. Um, and a lot of the problems that exist in these systems often can't be addressed at the attorney level because they are so systematic. I think if we had an actual drug rehabilitation center in America, or program, or like, uh, treatment programs in America, not church based, not religious based, and not demanding total sobriety. I mean, I've been through rehab. I've struggled with drugs and alcohol my entire life. It's absurd to have programs that are premised on full sobriety. It's absurd. And I've seen that harm a lot of people. I've seen drugs and alcohol harm a lot of people. I mean, the issue of drugs and alcohol are is a difficult one, because what a lot of people don't want to admit is that a lot of folks turn to drugs and alcohol. Okay, a lot of folks turn to drugs and alcohol because of pain. We're in a trauma. We're trauma this, trauma that. Well, a lot of that pain is caused because people are unnecessarily poor. And a lot of that pain is caused in this society because our upper middle and upper classes and even middle classes look down on poor people, right? If you're brown and black, you're otherized, and if you're poor white, you're white trash. That's it. You don't, I don't believe that. I'm just saying I've been around all these types of people. I've been around these people for decades. You know, if you're, yeah, it's one of those things. So, and just recently, just to wrap up, I kind of close out. Last year or so, I've been a drafting attorney in a state legislature, and honestly, I mean, just pure honesty, uh, it is for me. It has been. I have watched the war on terror drag on. I watched the war on terror drag on for decades. I have watched this genocide unfold in Palestine. Um, this is a bipartisan affair. Um, I don't know how things are going to go, but one thing I'm very certain of, having lived the life I've lived, is that the U.S. empire is drastically overextended, and I think there's a strong argument to be made that within the continental United States, we live in a partially failed state, one that can export genocide routinely and easily, it appears, and effortlessly almost, while not delivering health care, not delivering food or healthy food, and uh, over presiding over a gross human rights abuse, which is a criminal system, not being able to confront the climate catastrophe head on. Like, why is that? Do executives who make 10 millions of dollars a year don't want to confront that? Even though this is supposed to be a society of accountability, for it seems to be for poor and working people anyway. So I my hope is that in the future I'll have some guests on. We'll talk about a lot of these things. I'll draw on my experience. I'll draw on their experience. We'll draw on other people's experience and other evidence and analytics, and we could just have conversations and hopefully get to a better place of understanding and clarity, and maybe we can all play our small little part in, potentially make America and the world a place, because America's power does extend well beyond our borders. All right, so I guess we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. So okay, there we go. And so you can please like and subscribe, share the video if you'd like with friends or family, or on your socials. And you can find me on YouTube, Substack, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, maybe if it stays around. at Simple Country Lawyer, and that's Simple Country Lawyer with no vowels. I have nothing against vowels. It just makes for a shorter username. So it's SMPLCNTRYLW, Simple Country Lawyer, no vowels. Until next time, enjoy life. That's all I can say. I hope everything